From Chapter 1 of The Ghostwriter, Meeting Lonoff. It was the last daylight hour of a December afternoon more than 20 years ago. I was 23, writing and publishing my first short stories, and, like many a Bildungsroman hero before me, already contemplating my own massive Bildungsroman, when I arrived at his hideaway to meet the great man. The clapboard farmhouse was at the end of an unpaved road 1,200 feet up in the Berkshires. Yet the figure who emerged from the study to bestow a ceremonious greeting wore a gabardine suit, a knitted blue tie clipped to a white shirt by an unadorned silver clasp, and well-brushed ministerial black shoes that made me think of him stepping down from a shoeshine stand rather than from the high altar of art. Before I had composure enough to notice the commanding, autocratic angle at which he held his chin, or the regal, meticulous, rather dainty care he took to arrange his clothes before sitting, to notice anything, really, other than that I had miraculously made it from my unliterary origins to here, to him. My impression was that E.I. Lonoff looked more like the local superintendent of schools than the region's most original storyteller since Melville and Hawthorne. Not that the New York gossip about him should have led me to expect anything more grand. When I had recently raised his name before the jury at my first Manhattan publishing party, I'd arrived excited as a starlet on the arm of an elderly editor. Lonoff was almost immediately disposed of by the wits on hand, as though it were comical that a Jew of his generation, an immigrant child to begin with, should have married the scion of an old New England family and lived all these years in the country. That is to say, in the Goyish wilderness of birds and trees where America began and long ago had ended. However, since everybody else of renown I mentioned at the party also seemed slightly amusing to those in the know, I had been skeptical about their satiric description of the famous rural recluse. In fact, from what I saw at that party, I could begin to understand why hiding out 1,200 feet up in the mountains with just the birds and the trees might not be a bad idea for a writer, Jewish or not. The living room he took me into was neat, cozy, and plain. A large circular hooked rug, some slip-covered easy chairs, a worn sofa, a long wall of books, a piano, a phonograph, an oak library table systematically stacked with journals and magazines. Above the white wainscoting, the pale yellow walls were bare but for half a dozen amateur watercolors of the old farmhouse in different seasons. Beyond the cushioned window seats and the colorless cotton curtains tied primly back, I could see the bare limbs of big, dark maple trees and fields of driven snow. Purity, serenity, simplicity, seclusion. All one's concentration and flamboyance and originality reserved for the grueling, exalted, transcendent calling. I looked around and I thought, this is how I will live. We talked about literature and I was in heaven. Also in a sweat from the spotlight he was giving me to bask in. Every book new to me I was sure he must have annotated with his reading pen long ago, yet his interest was pointedly in hearing my thoughts, not his own. The effect of his concentrated attention was to make me heap insight onto precocious insight, and then to hang upon his every sigh and grimace, investing what was only a little bout of after-dinner dyspepsia with the direst implications about my taste and my intelligence. Though I worried that I was trying too hard to sound like the kind of deep thinker for whom he had no love, I couldn't stop myself, under the spell now not just of the man and his accomplishment, but of the warm wood fire, of the brandy snifter balanced in my hand, if not yet the brandy, and of the snow falling heavily beyond the cushioned window seats, as dependably beautiful and mystifying as ever. Then there were the great novelists whose spellbinding names I chanted as I laid my cross-cultural comparisons and brand-new eclectic enthusiasms at his feet. Zuckerman, with Lonoff, discussing Kafka. I couldn't quite get it, let alone get over it. And then there was his dinner-table toast. It still gave me a temperature of 105 each time I remembered it. To myself I swore that I would struggle for the rest of my life to deserve it. And wasn't that why he'd proposed it, this pitiless new master of mine? "I've just finished reading Isaac Babel," I told him. He considered this impassively. "I was thinking, for sport, more or less, that he is the missing link. Those stories are what connect you, if you don't mind my mentioning your work." He crossed his hands on his belly and rested them there, movement enough to make me say, "I'm sorry." "Go ahead. Connected to Babel. How?" "Well, connected, of course, isn't the right word. Neither is influence. It's family resemblance that I'm talking about. It's as though, as I see it, you are Babel's American cousin, and Felix Abravanel is the other. You through the sin of Jesus, and something in Red Cavalry, through the ironical dreaming and the blunt reporting, and, of course, through the writing itself. Do you see what I mean? There's a sentence in one of his war stories. Voroshilov combed his horse's mane with his Mauser. Well, that's just the kind of thing that you do. A stunning little picture in every line. Babel said that if he ever wrote his autobiography, he'd call it The Story of an Adjective. Well, if it were possible to imagine you writing your autobiography, if such a thing were even imaginable, you might come up with that title too. No? And Abravanel? Ah, with Abravanel it's Benya Crick and the Odessa mob, the gloating, the gangsters, all those gigantic types. It isn't that he throws in his sympathy with the brutes. It isn't that in Babel either. It's their awe of them. Even when they're appalled, they're in awe. Deep, reflective Jews, a little lovesick at the sound of all that untalmudic bone-crunching. Sensitive Jewish sages, as Babel says, dying to climb trees. In my childhood, I led the life of a sage. When I grew up, I started climbing trees. Yes, that's the line, said I, expecting no less, but still impressed. On I went. Look at Abravanel's Properly Scalded. Movie moguls, union moguls, racketeer moguls, women who are moguls just with their breasts, even the down-and-out bums who used to be moguls, talking like moguls of the down-and-out. It's Babel's fascination with big-time Jews, with conscienceless Cossacks, with everybody who has it his own way. The will is the big idea. Except Babel doesn't come off so lovable and enormous himself. That's not how he sees things. He is sort of a Abravanel with the self-absorption drained away. And if you drain away enough, well, in the end you arrive at Lonoff. And what about you? Me? Yes, you haven't finished. Aren't you a New World cousin in the Babel clan too? What is Zuckerman in all of this? Why, nothing. I've only published the 4 stories that I sent you. My relationship is non-existent. I think I'm still at the point where my relationship to my own work is practically non-existent. So I said, and quickly reached for my glass so as to duck my disingenuous face and take a bitter drop of brandy on my tongue. But Lonoff had read my designing mind all right. For when I came upon Babel's description of the Jewish writer as a man with autumn in his heart and spectacles on his nose, I had been inspired to add, and blood in his penis, and had then recorded the words like a challenge, a flaming Dedalian formula to ignite my soul's smithy.